ready to start. I know it's hard to come back after a lunch break, but we have a great lineup of speakers this afternoon, so I want to get started on time. I'm really delighted to have with us Kimberly Stedman, who's a data scientist at Motiga.
That's right.
And I think she's going to explain that to you. But she does big data for the gaming industry. She was, that's why she's right after lunch. Get them back in the room. She was originally a field anthropologist and has lived in 5 developing countries. She has a master's in social and organizational systems analysis. Kim specializes in design and management of the social systems that surround data technologies. In other words, awesome, we've got a better algorithm running on faster hardware. Now what? Kim gave a 5-minute Ignite talk on this topic, how to build an effective data science department. She also blogs as K2, and she wrote Brosie the Riveter, I like that, a comedic article on gender issues in gaming and STEM. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly.
I forgot she was going to read that intro, and all the funny things I was going to say on this slide are now said. So I work in the games industry, and how I got there from field anthropology is a long story that, lucky for you, I am not going to tell you. So I work for a company named Motiga, and we produce a game called Gigantic. It's a massive multiplayer online game, kind of like League of Legends. Anybody? All right. So we're just getting started. The game is brand new, and I'm helping them set up their data pipeline. And I've done this in a couple of companies by now, and I pretty much know where we're going. And where we're going is here. Now, this shouldn't be too surprising to anybody. So this is where we're headed. This is where we are. So our data is being sent by this janky, nasty, Unreal game stats engine that's out of the box into this totally machine-ready format that's horrible. My middle name is ETL. Lost my train of thought. My middle name is ETL, right. So it's OK because the game's still in alpha, and we've got a couple of hundred people who we've invited into the game to play it. Our main goal right now is just to balance the game so that like one hero isn't way overpowered compared to another one. And I started working with a game designer named Bob at the company to put together this study so that we could work on hero balance. So I brought in a bunch of testers and had them run with the heroes back and forth across the map, racing each other. And by parsing endlessly through this awful data, I was able to identify the shortest run for each hero, set them all to the same starting point, and then animate it so that you can watch them running across the map as though they're racing each other. And sure enough, when we did this, we discovered that some of the heroes are much faster than other ones. So I'm now going to present this information. And I sit down with our game design team, and I'm pretty stoked because they're new to data, and I'm new to the company, and I want to really blow them away. So I'm in there with the game design team, and the lead designer is there too, and I'm telling them about the study. And as we reach the end of it, he says, well, that's really awesome. I didn't know we could do that. But actually, I think that the heroes should run at different speeds. They do it in Team Fortress 2, and it's pretty effective. It gives the game more personality. I guess me and Bob, the game designer, really ought to sync up with each other. But anyway, that's a cool study. And I sat there, and I thought, I look like a total douchebag right now. And the reason that I look like a douchebag is I broke my one cardinal rule of doing data science, which is to first analyze the social systems of my company so that I would know whether the work I was doing was going to produce actual value. I see this happening a lot. Endemic to the data science industry, I see us walking forward proudly with this amazing analysis that we figured out how to do, our algorithms and techniques and results, but no actual accountability or discussion of how we put that into an organization and actually reap benefit. And I think the organizations are equally complicit in this. Like, I love this slide. So the sense is that they're just going to kind of walk onto the scene and invoke these big data science buzzwords that they've been hearing, and that's going to automatically provide value. And I hate to say it, but it just ain't the case. We, as far as I can tell, as a discipline, we're not working on this problem. And we need to be, because ultimately, we're accountable for producing impact and value to the companies that we work for. So this is the cycle of creating that impact. You start with a hypothesis, and then you triage those hypotheses and select for the ones that are going to have the largest impact for your organization. You do the analysis, and then you communicate the analysis to other human beings who have to care about it and internalize it so that they can make an accurate and educated choice. Then they do something, and we generate more hypotheses. This is the process of returning value, and the hardware goes right there. That's the only place that it lives. Every single other aspect of this cycle is a wetware problem. And by wetware, I mean humans. And I am sorry to bring them up. They're nasty, messy, and unpredictable, and they make a bunch of dumb choices. But unfortunately, they are the central element to the data science process. So, data science is about teaching organizations to learn. Data science is the science of being wrong. So I want to talk about architecting the social systems to mitigate the stupidity of people. When you do that, you can actually have a tangible impact on the way that people process and utilize your information. So today I'm going to talk about information dispersal systems within an organization. I'm going to talk about keeping the fidelity of the signal that you're distributing, the blocks in reception that people have, and lastly, how you choose what signal you're going to send out to have the best impact on your organization. So I study social systems analysis. It's the one bridge between anthropology and data science, and I'm pretty sure, rather anthropology and gaming, and I'm pretty sure there's only one. So in social systems analysis, we look at the structures that give rise to collective human cognition. So we're talking about incentive systems, reputation systems, and social network analysis. And the backbone, if you will, of a social system is its communications network. This is the central nervous system of any collective intelligence. And data science is the new collective intelligence of a company. Like, we are that central nervous system. At no pressure, right? And unfortunately, we're brand new, and people have no idea how to get value out of us. We have not been integrated into the body of the organization, and we need to be, because our job is to take information, not data, but information, and distribute it all the way to the fingers and toes of our organization, and then take their feedback and bring it back up into a central place where we can evaluate it to create a coherent picture. So this is the old-timey organizational model. Information starts at the executive level, goes down to management, goes down to the functional teams, and then comes back up. It's really vertical. And this structure is still in place. Here is a structure of a data team that I like. So on the outside, I call it the hub and spoke model. On the outside, you've got your analysts, and these are your front-facing analysts. They have some technical skills, but they don't have PhDs in machine learning. Those people are expensive and vital, and you're only going to get one or two of them. So those are the blue dots. They sit closer into the center, and they advise and design studies with the outward-facing analysts, and they help them through the gnarly bits. And then in the center, you've got an executive, or if you're really lucky, a product manager, who has visibility into the broader priorities of the organization, putting the central back into central nervous system. So the problem is that even if you've got this great structure, it's still sitting outside of that body of your organization. And that means that we are often doing analysis and then distributing it through the entire organization, throwing it into the ether. And then it goes out, and people misconstrue it wildly. And then you come back 2 weeks later, and they've done something in response to the data, and it's total bullshit. And you're sitting there saying, how did you guys get from here to there? And the answer is they got there because they don't know what they're doing. They're brand new to data. It's our responsibility to teach them how to utilize data and shepherd it through the process. Never leave your data unchaperoned. So this is the model that I recommend for creating an integrated central nervous system with the body. Ultimately, these two social networks wrap around each other in a circle to create a feedback loop so that intelligence leads to action. Your front-facing analysts are embedded within your functional teams. And by embedded, I mean they sit with them several days a week and absorb the culture of that team and the priorities and experiments that are coming up for them so that we can do an analysis before it's too late to do the analysis. And when we come back to this team with information, not data, but information, we can monitor the way that they're interpreting that and the way that interpretation evolves over time. Then we take all of our learnings back into this central node and exchange them with one another so that ultimately the executive in the middle has a broader understanding of what the organization is trying to do. This is the opposite of preserving signal. When you create dashboards, it's really easy to create them, and so they just kind of collect on the periphery of your team. And they become decoupled from your data schema because your data is always evolving. They're often wrong. Nobody looks at them. And when they do, they misinterpret them and they go off and do crazy things. This is us not shepherding our data all the way through the process. I hate them. So our job is to communicate our findings to humans. If we don't communicate them to humans, we're not making any progress. So we've talked about architecting the dispersal systems, and now I'm going to talk about removing those blocks. So the biggest block is people are afraid of us. And they're afraid that we're going to show up and tell them that the stuff they've been working on is wrong and that it's not producing any value. And they're afraid we're going to do this because it is, in fact, what we are going to do, right? Data is all about being wrong. That's the point. So the point of it is that you go forward with something that you're trying, you get feedback, and then you do it again iteratively and quickly. But the old status hierarchy of that ancient organizational structure is that you be right. So we, too, are subject to that. And also we're the focus of a lot of hype, and we're nervous that people are going to come out and call us out on our studies as being wrong, and they are going to. And that's fine, too. When you live in that embedded model, and your analyst is there with the team, they're always aware of the study that you're doing and the value that they might get out of that. And they collaborate with you to have a response by the time they go out in public, so it's not a public humiliation. And they also poke holes in your studies before you are on the spot. It's good when people poke holes in your studies because it means you're learning. Also, we're all new at this. We all have radically different skill sets, and we come from different backgrounds. I'm an excellent example of that. So that hub and spoke model permits us to then theoretically allocate at least 10% of our time to training one another in the hard skills where we have no overlap. Wouldn't it also be awesome if there were roving bands of data trainers who would go to organizations once we've acknowledged that we don't know what we're doing and sit down with us on a regular basis to educate us about the technologies and techniques that we don't yet know? The awesome thing about that is that there is a trickle down of data intelligence. You've got your heavy lifters at the top training your analysts, who then sit with your functional teams who absorb that information and knowledge about how to interact with data and learn from it. That goes to their managers. And by the end of it, in a couple of years, we've got organizations who are all trained and interacting with data. So we've talked about architecting the systems. And we've talked about lowering the blocks to reception on both sides. So what signal do you bother sending across this network? So a buddy of mine calls this process data psychotherapy. You're sitting within your team, and they say to you, I would like a metric, please. And you say, nah, let's go back to your childhood. So first, we say, what is the question that you're trying to answer? They come out with a question. And you go, awesome. What action will you take if we answer this question? And if the answer is, well, I don't know, I just kind of want to know, don't do it. Next, establish a threshold for action. When people come back with data, teams often say, I don't know, I guess that's how it's supposed to work. Now, first you want to capture the intuition of a person and say, all right, if it's below 20%, we all agree, we're going to act. Next, and this is where I messed up, do you in fact have the power to take this action once we do it? If the answer is no, then set aside some time for them to explore their hierarchy to make sure that they know what response is appropriate. And finally, what is the potential financial value of doing this study? Now, once we've gone through that entire process, we now have to answer the question, right? So I've been saying data team this entire time because it's the common parlance, but in reality, it's a research team. Data science is just a subfield of research, and research has been around forever. Data may look like a hammer, but not every question is a nail, and you can waste crazy amounts of time trying to answer qualitative questions in a quantitative way. Hold a focus group once in a while. Talk to humans and sit them down in front of your product. It can save you a ton of time. And lastly on this tip, there is no, I mean, this is all the same thing. There is no data-driven organization. And I say that with a caveat, which is that there is a data-driven organization. It is called Zynga. They make Farmville. You guys know about Farmville? Of course, everybody does, right? They are generally reviled within the games industry because, you're laughing, you know what I'm talking about. They have this huge analytics department, and they're massively data-driven, and they produce soulless things that suck money out of your wallet. We don't want to produce soulless things, right? So there's a time as we're bringing our signal to the organization where we just back off and let the creatives do their thing. So as you're evaluating whether your signal was effective, stand up and ask yourself, is my team doing anything? And there's a process that we can follow that's been set up by all of these other elements. So if you're embedded with your team and you've done data psychotherapy, you have a potential financial return on every study that you've done. And since you're working with them every day, you know whether they actually followed through on it. Then you're able to quantify your value in the organization over, let's say, the course of a year. And like everyone else, we're accountable to evolve against a metric. And that metric is the amount of value that we provide for our overhead. That number should go up. So we have talked about architecting information dispersal systems to maintain signal fidelity and increasing the receptivity of our nodes to the signal that we're dispersing, and then prioritizing the signals that we choose to send. And we should do this. We should do this because there's always a risk that once the hype dies down, the organization is going to start doing the math. And if we don't weigh more the cost it takes to maintain us, they could get rid of us. We don't want this. We want to follow a process where there is a linear path from what we're doing to the justification of our own existence, that we may live happily ever after with our companies, the end. I also don't know what I'm doing. Here are some questions I'm trying to answer. If you have thoughts about these, I want to hear about them, so please tweet to me. How do we identify the people who can be excellent analysts but don't have the skills yet? Because as we all know, there's a deficit in trained people, so at some point we're just going to have to find good people and start training them. How do we do that? 2, how? Somebody tell me. Please, how do you explain the complexity and cost of putting in a data infrastructure to a team that's never had one and does not want to know? And finally, how do we version control data so that an analyst 2 years from now understands that the definition of one table changed on October 31st, 2014? I'm trying to figure it out, and I'd love to collaborate to learn what you think. Thank you. What time is it? Okay, good. Cheers.
No, if you want to take questions, you can take questions.
Oh, I thought you said we didn't have any more time.
No,
Yeah, sure.
Time.
Questions or answers? Anybody? All right. I'm going to be out in the hallway after this if anybody wants to talk to me offline. Oh, yeah.
So what do you feel is the biggest challenge in communicating with people who don't or haven't worked with data, say for arbitrary number of 20 years, and now you come along and say, hey, look, data is going to help you make better decisions. How do you communicate that?
You mean how do you sell data in the first place?
I don't mean sell, I mean convince your the center of that hub and spoke that are whoever it is, an executive and product developer, whoever, that it's important to look at the data.
Yeah, that's difficult. So my suggestion, as I sort of implied here, is that we start at a lower level than the executives, because they're responsible for making the most choices and for being right almost all the time, right? So they, in my personal opinion, they're going to be the least dialed into this new process. So the techniques that I've used in the past is to select a couple people from any given team who are obviously data advocates and who have some intuition for how it works, and to collaborate with them actively to produce studies that actually make a change. And then you kind of become this Borg of data advocacy, right? Moving throughout the organization and assimilating everybody. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks.
Mine is just a suggestion. You would ask questions.
Yes.
For finding people with the right stuff, have you looked at the McKinsey Group as a model?
No, tell me more.
The McKinsey Group, long ago, they had a CEO who faced a problem very similar to yours, and that is that within the business consulting group or industry, he found a paucity of the talent that he needed. A paucity, excuse me.
Paucity, it's still a great word.
These two words, they fit together. But what he did then was to turn to people who were the chemists, who were the physicists, who were the mathematicians, knowing that if they mastered that, if they were at the master's or at the PhD level in particular, they would pick up accounting and business and strategy and so forth very easily. My bet is that if you took the same approach, someone who has mastered mathematics, statistics, some of these others, would pick up data science skills if they don't already have them. Because I'll tell you, my experience is that people who are in astrophysics, they've got it. And so that might be a rich pool for you to consider.
I agree with that with two caveats. One of them is that whenever I go to like Strata, the big data science conference, I see these message boards filled with people looking for people who've come out of those hard sciences. The reality is most of them already have jobs. So we're pulling people from places where there is already a paucity of talent, right? So that's a challenging problem. And also, when I talk about those barriers to information dispersal, one of the big ones is putting your heavy lifting stats person in front of other humans and having them try to explain it to those humans with no expertise in data. And that is typically a terrible bet. So what I'm usually looking for is, like, I understand I'm going to have to pay a ton of money to bring in the heavy lifters. But I need these analysts who are going to interface with teams who become literate in data and fundamental ETL tools, but who can then take that and have an active interaction and some project management skills with the people in which they're embedded. And it's that periphery that I'm struggling to find. And honestly, I'm kind of hoping we're going to start mining from sociologists because they don't have jobs.
So just on that note, I work with a ton of people who were trained in undergraduate economics who then become data analysts, and typically, you know, they still fall into that, oh, sociology, you know, soft science, like how do I find a job bucket? So I think that's a really great place to look.
I love working with economists. In the games industry, you almost always have to have one because you are actually building an economy. So I completely endorse that statement.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess more of like an industry question. Who in the gaming industry do you feel does a really great job with analytics? Are there certain companies that really stand out?
Yeah, there are a couple of companies that have already implemented that hub and spoke model and who are actively cross-training their teams. Riot Games is a really good one, the company that produces League. And people love their game. I mean, they haven't rendered it into this soulless husk like Zynga does. It's a really good game.
Thanks.
We good? Thank you, guys.